Chapter 7. They crossed the bridge to the right bank of the river, and followed the stream down for some distance. Passing through some narrow lanes, they presently emerged into a street of higher pretensions, and stopped at the door of a small house wedged in between two of much larger size. The boy took a key from his girdle, opened the door, and entered. "Stand here a moment, I pray you," he said. "I will fetch a light." In a few seconds he appeared with a lantern. He shut and barred the door, and then led the way upstairs and showed them into a small but well furnished room, which was lighted by a hanging lamp. He then went to a buffet, brought out a flask of wine and two goblets, and said, "Will it please you to be seated and to help yourselves to the wine? My master may possibly be detained for some little time before he is able to see you." Then he went out and closed the door behind him. "It's evident, Tom," Guy said, as he took off his hat and cloak and seated himself, "that the doctor has a good idea of making himself comfortable. Sit down, we have to wait some time." "Do you think it will be safe to touch the wine, Master Guy? Perchance it may be drugged." "Why should it be?" Guy asked. "We are not such important personages that anyone can desire to make away with us. I am convinced that the doctor was in earnest when he told me that story that I repeated to you this evening. It is possible that he may not be able to give us much information, as he said, but that he means well by us I am certain, and I think we may be sure that his wine is as good as his apartments are comfortable." This turned out to be the case. The wine was excellent, and the archer soon laid aside any doubt he might have entertained. From time to time steps could be heard in the apartment above, and it was evident that it was here that the interview between the doctor and his visitor was taking place. Presently a ring was heard below. "Another visitor," Guy said. Getting up, he slightly drew aside a thick curtain that hung before a casement. A moment later he let it fall again. "There are two men at arms standing on the other side of the street, and one at the door." He heard the door open, then the boy's step was heard on the stairs. 2 or 3 minutes later there was a movement above, and the sound of the footsteps of two men coming down. Presently the outside door closed. 2 or 3 minutes elapsed, then the door opened and the Italian entered. "I regret that I have kept you so long," he said courteously, "but my visitor was not to be got rid of hastily. It was a lady, and there is no hurrying ladies. When a man comes in I have already ascertained what he desires to know. He listens to my answer and takes his departure. A woman, on the contrary, has 1,000 things to ask, and for the most part they are questions quite beyond my power to answer. I have, as you see, Signor Montepone, brought my tall countryman with me. As you noticed me, I doubt not for a moment that you also marked him when we entered the city. Knowing nothing of the ways of Paris, but having heard that the streets were very unsafe after dark, I thought it best to bring him with me, and I am indeed glad that I did so, for we met with several very rough looking characters on our way to Notre Dame, and had I been alone I might have had trouble." "You did quite right," the Italian said. "I regretted afterwards that I did not myself advise you to bring someone with you, for indeed it is not safe for one man to go abroad alone after dark. And now, will you accompany me upstairs? This tall fellow will doubtless be able to pass the time with that flask of wine until you return." "He should be able to do so," Guy said with a smile, "for indeed it is the best wine I have tasted, so far as my judgment goes, since I crossed the Channel, and indeed the best I have ever tasted." "Yes, 'tis good wine. I received a cask of it from my grower, a Burgundian noble, who had, as he believed, gained some advantage from following my advice." The man led the way upstairs. The room he entered there was much larger than that which they had left, extending over the whole floor. It was draped similarly to that in the booth, but was far more handsomely and elaborately got up. The hangings were of heavy cloth sprinkled with stars. The ceiling was blue with gold stars. A planisphere and astrolabe stood in the centre of the room, and a charcoal fire burned in a brazier beside them. A pair of huge bats with outstretched wings hung by wires from the ceiling, their white teeth glistening in the light of 4 lamps on stands some 6 feet high, one in each corner of the room. The floor was covered with a dark Eastern carpet. A large chair with a footstool in front stood at a short distance from the planisphere. At one end was a massive table on which were retorts, glass globes, and a variety of apparatus new to Guy. At the other end of the room there was a frame some 8 feet square, on which a white sheet was stretched tightly. "Now, Master Guy," the Italian said, "first I beg you to give me the date of your birth, and if possible the hour, for I would, for my own information if not for yours, cast your horoscope. I like to know, for my own satisfaction as far as may be, the future of those with whom I have to deal. If I perceive that misfortunes and perhaps death threaten them, it is clearly of no use my entering into relations with them. In your case, of course, it is with your mistress that I am chiefly concerned. Still, as your fortunes are at present so closely mixed up with hers, I may learn something of much utility to me from your horoscope. I was born on the 8th of December, 1394, and shall be therefore 17 in a fortnight's time. I was born a few minutes after midnight, for I have heard my mother say that the castle bell had sounded but a few minutes before I was born. She said that she had been anxious about it, because an old woman had predicted that if she ever had a child born on the 7th day of the month, it would be in every way unfortunate, so my mother was greatly pleased that I had escaped the consequences predicted. And now, the Italian went on, having made a note in his tablet, what said your lady? She bid me say, sir, that she was very sensible of the advantage that it would be to her to receive news or warning from one so well informed as yourself, and that she on her part promises that she will befriend and protect your daughter, should you at any time bring her to her castle in England, or should she come alone with such tokens from you as that she might be known. And this promise my lady vows on the sacraments to keep. Then we are in agreement, the Italian said, and right glad am I to know that, should aught befall me, my daughter will be in such good hands. As far as worldly means are concerned, her future is assured, for I have laid out much of the money I have received in jewels of value, which will produce a sum that will be an ample dowry for her. Now I can give you some news. The Duke of Berry with the Queen came 2 days since from Melun to Corbeil, and Louis of Bavaria came on here yesterday to the Duke of Aquitaine with a message to Burgundy and to the butchers, asking that they would allow him to attend the Queen to Paris, and that she might reside in his house of Nasle. Burgundy was minded to grant her leave, but at a meeting of the chiefs of the Guild of Butchers this afternoon they resolved to refuse the request, and this evening they have broken every door and window of the Duke of Berry's house, and committed great damages there, so that it should not be habitable. They resolved that Berry should not enter Paris, but that the Queen might come. I hear that it has been determined that the King shall be placed in the Louvre, where the citizens of Paris can keep guard over him and prevent any attempt by the Orleanists to carry him away. All this will make no difference to your mistress directly. The point of it is that the power of these butchers, with whom go the Guild of Skinners and others, is so increasing that even the Duke of Burgundy is forced to give in to them. Some of the other guilds and the greater part of the respectable traders are wholly opposed to these men. They themselves may care little whether Orleans or Burgundy sways the court and the king, but this usurpation of the butchers, who have behind them the scum of Paris, is regarded as a danger to the whole city, and the feeling may grow into so hot a rage that there may be serious rioting in the streets. I tell you this that you may be prepared. Assuredly the butchers are not likely to interfere with any save such of the townspeople as they may deem hostile to them, and no harm would intentionally be done to her or to any other hostage of Burgundy. But the provost of the silversmiths is one of those who withstands them to the best of his power, and should matters come to serious rioting, his house might be attacked. The leaders of the Butchers' Guild would be glad to see him killed, and their followers would still more like to have the sacking of his rich magazine of silver goods and the spoiling of his furniture. I say not that things are likely to come to that, but there is no telling how far they may be carried. It is but a dark cloud in the distance at present, but it may in time burst into a storm that will deluge the streets of Paris with blood. I may tell you that against you as English there is no strong feeling at present among the Burgundians, for I am informed that the Duke has taken several bodies of English archers into his pay, and that at Soissons and other towns he has enlisted a score or two of these men. However, I am sure to gain information long before matters come to any serious point, except a sudden outbreak arise from a street broil. I may tell you that one result of the violence of the butchers today may be to cause some breach between them and the Burgundian nobles, who are, I am told, greatly incensed at their refusing to give permission to the Duke of Berry to come here after Burgundy had acceded to his request, and that these fellows should venture to damage the hotel of one of the royal dukes seemed to them to be still more intolerable. The Duke of Burgundy may truckle to these fellows, but his nobles will strongly resent their interference and their arrogant insolence, and the Duke may find that if he is to retain the support of the nobles he will have to throw over that of these turbulent citizens. Moreover, their conduct adds daily to the strength of the Orleanists among the citizens, and if a strong Armagnac force approaches Paris, they will be hailed by no small portion of the citizens as deliverers." "In truth I can well understand, Signor Montepone, that the nobles should revolt against this association with butchers and skinners. 'Tis past all bearing that fellows like these should thus meddle in public affairs." "The populace of Paris has ever been turbulent," the Italian replied. "In this it resembles the cities of Flanders, and the butchers are ever at the bottom of all tumults. Now I will introduce my daughter to you. It is well that you should know her, for in case of need she may serve as a messenger, and it may be that I may some day ask you to present her to your lady." He opened the door. "Katarina," he said without raising his voice, and at once a girl came running up from the floor below. "This is my daughter, Master Aylmer. You have seen her before." Katarina was a girl of some 14 years of age. She was dressed in black and was tall and slight. Her complexion was fairer than that of her father, and she already gave promise of considerable beauty. Guy bowed to her as she made her reverence, while her face lit up with an amused smile. "Your father says I have seen you before, signora, but in sooth I know not where or how, since it was but this morning that I arrived in Paris." "We parted but half an hour since, monsieur." "Parted?" Guy repeated with a puzzled expression on his face. "Surely you are jesting with me." "Do you not recognize my messenger?" the Italian said with a smile. "My daughter is my assistant. In a business like mine one cannot trust a stranger to do one service, and as a boy she could come and go unmarked when she carries a message to persons of quality. She looks a saucy page in the daytime when she goes on the business, but after nightfall she is dressed as you saw her this evening. As a girl she could not traverse the streets unattended, and I am far too busy to bear her company, but as a boy she can go where she likes, and indeed it's only when we are alone, and there is little chance of my having visitors, that she appears in her proper character." "You must be very courageous, signora," Guy said, "but indeed I can well imagine that you can pass where you will without anyone suspecting you to be a girl, for the thought that this was so never entered my head." "I am so accustomed to the disguise," she said, "that I feel more comfortable in it than dressed as I now am, and it is much more amusing to be able to go about as I like than to remain all day cooped up here when my father is abroad." "And now, Master Aylmer, that you have made my daughter's acquaintance, and I have told you what news I have gathered, it needs not that I should detain you longer. The hour is getting late already, and your lady may well be getting anxious at your absence. Can you read?" "Yes, signor. The priest at my lady's castle in England, of which my father is castellan during my lord's absences, instructed me." "It is well, for sometimes a note can be slipped into a hand when it would not be safe to deliver a message by word of mouth. From time to time, if there be anything new, you shall hear from me, but there will be no occasion for you to come hither again, unless there is something of importance on which I may desire to have speech with you, or you with me. Remain here, Katarina, until my return. I will see monsieur out, and bar the door after him." Passing downstairs, Guy looked in at the room where he had left the archer. The latter sprung to his feet as he entered with a somewhat dazed expression on his face, for indeed he had fallen off into a sound sleep. "We are going now, Tom," Guy said. "I have concluded my business with this gentleman. We will not go back the way we came," he went on as they issued into the street, "for I am sure we should never find our way through those alleys. Let us keep along here until we come to a broader street leading the way we wish to go. Fortunately, with the river to our left, we cannot go very far wrong." They presently came to a street leading in the desired direction. They had scarcely entered it when they heard ahead of them the sound of a fray. A loud cry arose, and there was a clashing of sword blades. "Come on, Tom," Guy said. "It may be that some gentleman is attacked by these ruffians of the streets." Starting off at a run, they soon arrived at the scene of the combat, the features of which they were able to see by the light of the lamp that hung in the centre of the street. A man was standing in a narrow doorway, which prevented his being attacked except in front, and the step on which he stood gave him a slight advantage over his adversaries. These were nearly a dozen in number, and were evidently, as Guy had supposed, street ruffians of the lowest class. Without hesitation, Guy and the archer fell upon them with a shout of encouragement to the defender of the doorway, who was evidently sorely pressed. Tom's quarterstaff sent two of the men rolling on the ground almost before they realized that they were attacked, while Guy ran another through the body. For a moment the assailants scattered, but then, seeing that they were attacked by only two men, they fell upon them with fury. Guy defended himself stoutly, but he would have fared badly had it not been for the efforts of Long Tom, whose staff descended with such tremendous force upon the heads of his assailants that it broke down their guard and sent man after man on to the pavement. Guy himself received a sharp wound in the shoulder, but cut down another of his assailants, and the defender of the door, leaving his post of vantage, now joined them, and in a couple of minutes but 4 of the assailants remained on their feet, and these, with a shout of dismay, turned and took to their heels. Guy had now opportunely arrived. As the latter took off his hat, he saw time to look at the gentleman to whose assistance he had, so that the stranger was but a year or two older than himself. "By our Lady, sir," the young man said, "you arrived at a lucky moment, for I could not much longer have kept these ruffians at bay. I have to thank you for my life, which assuredly they would have taken, especially as I had disposed of 2 of their comrades before you came up. May I ask to whom I am so indebted? I am the Count Charles d'Estournel." "My name is Guy Aylmer, sir. I am the son of Sir James Aylmer, an English knight, and am here as the esquire of Dame Margaret de Villeroy, who arrived but this morning in Paris." "And who is this stalwart fellow whose staff has done more execution than both our sword blades?" the young count asked. "Verily it rose and fell like a flail on a threshing floor." "He is one of Dame Margaret's retainers, and the captain of a band of archers in her service, but is at present here as one of her men at arms." "In truth, I envy her so stout a retainer. Good fellow, I have to thank you much, as well as Monsieur Guy Aylmer, for your assistance." "One is always glad of an opportunity to stretch one's arms a bit when there is but a good excuse for doing so," the archer said, "and one needs no better chance than when one sees a gentleman attacked by such scum as these ruffians," and he motioned to the men lying stretched on the ground. "Ah, you are English," D'Estournel said, with a slight smile at Tom's very broken French. "I know all about you now," he went on, turning to Guy. "I was not present today when your lady had an audience with Burgundy, but I heard that an English dame had arrived, and that the duke came but badly out of the encounter in words with her. But we had best be moving on, or we may have the watch on us, and we should be called upon to account for these 10 fellows lying here. I doubt not but half of them are only stunned and will soon make off. The other 6 will have to be carried away. We have a good account to give of ourselves, but the watch would probably not trouble themselves to ask any questions, and I have no fancy for spending a night locked up in the cage with perhaps a dozen unsavoury malefactors. Which way does your course lie, sir?" "We are lodged at the house of Maître Leroux, provost of the silversmiths." "Ah, then you are going in the wrong direction. You return up this street, then turn to your right. His house is in the 3rd street to the left. I shall do myself the honour of calling in the morning to thank you more fully for the service you have rendered me, which, should it ever fall into my power, you can count on my returning. My way now lies in the opposite direction." After mutual salutes they parted, and Guy followed the directions given to them. "That was a sharp skirmish, Master Guy," Long Tom said contentedly. "The odds were just enough to make it interesting. Did you escape scatheless?" "Well, no, not altogether, Tom. I had a sword thrust in my shoulder, but I can do with it until I get back, when I shall give you to bandage it for me." "That will I. I did not get so much as a scratch. A quarterstaff is a rare weapon in a fight like that, for you can keep well out of the reach of their swords. In faith, I have not had so pleasant an exercise since that fight Dickon and I had in the marketplace at Winchester last Lammas fair." "I am afraid Dame Margaret will scold us for getting into a fray." "Had it not been for your wound, we need have said nothing about it, but you may be sure that you will have to carry your arm in a sling for a day or two, and she will want to know the ins and outs of that matter." "I think the affair has been a fortunate one, for it has obtained for me the friendship of a young Burgundian noble. Friendless as we are here, this is no slight matter, and I by no means grudge the amount of blood I have lost for such a gain. There is a light in Dame Margaret's casement. She said that she would sit up till my return, and would herself let me in, for the household would be asleep 2 hours ago, and as Maître Leroux and his wife have shown themselves so kindly disposed towards us, she should not like the household disturbed at such an hour. I was to whistle a note or two of Richard Monroy, and she would know that we were without." Guy whistled a bar or two of the air, then saw a shadow cross the casement, then the light disappeared, and in a minute they heard the bolts undrawn and the door opened. "You are late, Guy," she said. "I have been expecting you this hour past. Why, what has happened to you?" she broke off as she saw his face. "It is but a trifle, lady," he said, "a sword thrust in the shoulder, and a little blood. Long Tom will bind it up. Our delay was caused partly by the fact that the Italian was engaged, and it was half an hour before I could see him. Moreover, we had been kept at the trysting place, as the guide did not recognize me, owing to Tom being with me; and lastly, we were somewhat delayed by the matter that cost me this sword thrust, which I in no way grudge, since it has gained for us a friend who may be useful." Tom had by this time barred the door, and had gone upstairs. "I am disappointed in you, Guy," Dame Margaret said severely, when they entered the room. "I told you to keep yourself free from frays of all kinds, and here you have been engaged in one before we have been 12 hours in Paris." "I crave your pardon, madam, but it is not in human nature to stand by without drawing a sword on behalf of a young gentleman defending himself against a dozen cutthroats. I am sure that in such a case your ladyship would be the first to bid me draw and strike in." The matter did not last 3 minutes. Tom disposed of 6 of them with his quarterstaff. The gentleman had killed 2 before we arrived, and I managed to dispose of 2 others. The rest took to their heels. "The young gentleman was Count Charles d'Estournel. He is, as it seems, in the Duke of Burgundy's train, and as we undoubtedly saved his life, he may turn out a good and useful friend." "You are right, Guy. I spoke perhaps too hastily. Oh, and now about the other matter." Guy told her all that had taken place. "And what is this man like?" she asked, when he had concluded. "But now that I saw him without the astrologer's robe and in his ordinary costume, he seems to me a very proper gentleman," Guy replied. "He is my height or thereabouts, grave in face and of good presence. I have no doubt that he is to be trusted, and he is evidently resolved to do all in his power to aid you, should it be necessary to do so. He would scarcely have introduced his daughter to me had it not been so." "He must be a strange man," Dame Margaret said thoughtfully. "He is certainly no common man, lady. As I have told you, he believes thoroughly in his science, and but adopts the costume in which I first saw him in the role of a quack mender of nostrums, in order that his real profession may not be known to the public, and so bring him in collision with the church." "It seems to me, Guy," Dame Margaret said the next morning, "that as you have already made the acquaintance of a young French noble, and may probably meet with others, 'twill be best that when we have finished our breakfast you should lose no time in sallying out and providing yourself with suitable attire. Spare not money, for my purse is very full. Get yourself a suit in which you can accompany me fitly if I again see the duke, or, as is possible, have an interview with the queen. Get 2 others, the one a quiet one, not likely to attract attention, for your ordinary wear, the other a more handsome one to wear when you go into the company of the young men of station, like this Burgundian noble whom you succoured last night. Your father being a knight, you may well, as the esquire of my lord, hold your head as high as other young esquires of good family in the train of French nobles." On Agnes and Charlie coming into the room, the latter exclaimed, "Why have got your arm in a scarf, Guy?" "He was in a fray last night, Charlie. He and Tom came upon a number of ruffians fighting a young gentleman, so they joined in and helped the gentleman, and Guy was wounded in the shoulder." "Did they beat the bad men, mother?" "Oh yes, dear. Guy had taken a sword with him, as it was after dark, and Tom had his quarterstaff." "Then the others can have had no chance," Charlie said decidedly. "I have often seen Long Tom playing with the quarterstaff, and he could beat anyone in the castle. I warrant he laid about him well. I should have liked to have been there to have seen it, mother." "It will be a good many years yet, Charlie, before you will be old enough to go out after dark in such a place as Paris." "But I saw real fighting at the castle, mother, and I am sure I was not afraid, even when the cannon made a great noise." "No, you behaved very well, Charlie; but it is one thing to be standing on the top of a keep, and another to be in the streets when a fray is going on all round." "Did you kill anyone, Guy?" the boy asked eagerly. "Some of them were wounded," Guy replied, "but I cannot say for certain that anyone was killed." "They ought to be killed, these bad men who attack people in the street. If I were King of France I would have all their heads chopped off." "Well, it is not so easy to catch them, Charlie. When the watch came upon them when they are doing such things, there is not much mercy shown to them." As soon as breakfast was over, Guy went out, after learning from Maître Leroux the address of a tradesman who generally kept a stock of garments in store, in readiness for those passing through Paris who might not have time to stop while clothes were specially made for them. He returned in the course of an hour, followed by a boy carrying a wooden case with the clothes which he had bought. He had been fortunate in getting 2 suits which fitted him perfectly. They had been made for a young knight who had been despatched by the Duke to Flanders, just after he had been measured for them, and the tailor said that he was glad to sell them, as for aught he knew it might be weeks or even months before the knight returned, and he could make other suits for him at his leisure. Thus Guy was provided at once with his two best suits. For the other he had been measured, and it was to be sent in a couple of days. On his return he went straight to his room and attired himself in readiness to receive the visit of Count Charles d'Estournel. The suit consisted of an orange-coloured doublet coming down to the hips, with puce sleeves. The trousers were blue, and fitting closely to the legs. The shoes were of the great length then in fashion, being some 18 inches from the heel to the pointed toe. The court suit was similar in make, but more handsome, the doublet, which was of crimson, being embroidered with gold. The close-fitting trousers were striped with light blue and black. The cap with the suit in which he was now dressed was yellow, that with the court suit crimson, and both were high and conical, resembling a sugar loaf in shape. From his sword belt he carried a light straight sword instead of the heavier one that would be carried in actual warfare, and on the right side was a long dagger. Charlie clapped his hands as Guy entered the sitting room. "Oh, that will do very well, Master Esquire," Dame Margaret said with a smile. "Truly you look as well fitted as if they had been made for you, and the colours are well chosen." Guy told her how he had obtained them. "You are very fortunate," she said, "and this afternoon, when I mean to take a walk to see the city, I shall feel that I am well escorted with you by my side." "Shall you take us, mother?" Charles asked anxiously. "Yes, I intend to do so. You are so accustomed to be in the open air that you would soon pine if confined here, though indeed the air outside is but close and heavy compared with that at home. I have been speaking to Master Leroux while you have been away, and he tells me that a post goes once a week to Lille, and that he will send a letter for me to Sir Eustace under cover of a worthy trader of that town, who will forward it thence to Villeroy by a messenger. Therefore I shall write this morning. My lord will be pleased indeed to learn that we are so comfortably bestowed here, and that there is no cause for any uneasiness on his part." Chapter 8. A Riot. While Dame Margaret was speaking to Guy, one of the servitors came up with word that Count Charles d'Estournel was below, desiring to speak with Master Guy Aylmer. "Show the Count up, or no, you had best go down yourself to receive him, Guy. Pray him to come up with you, it will be more fitting." Guy at once went down. "So this is my saviour of last night," the Count said gaily as Guy joined him. "I could scarce get a view of your face then, as the lamps gave such a poor light, and I should hardly have known you again. Besides, you were wrapped up in your cloak. But you told me that you were an esquire, and I see that you carry a sword. I want to take you out to introduce you to some of my friends. Can you accompany me now?" "Oh, I shall do so willingly, Count, but first will you allow me to present you to my lady mistress? She prayed me to bring you up to her apartments." "That shall I right do willingly. Those who were present yesterday speak of her as a noble lady." They went upstairs together. "My lady, this is Count Charles d'Estournel, who desires me to present him to you." "I am glad to meet you, Sir Count," Dame Margaret said, holding out her hand, which he raised to his lips. "Seeing that my esquire, Master Guy Aylmer, was able to render you some slight assistance last night, this is my daughter Agnes and my son Charles." "The service was by no means a slight one," the young count said, returning a deep salute that Agnes and Charles made to him, "unless indeed you consider that my life is a valueless one, for assuredly without his aid, and that of your tall retainer, my father would have been childless this morning. I was indeed in sore plight when they arrived. My arm was tiring, and I could not have defended myself very much longer against such odds, and as I had exasperated them by killing two of their comrades, I should have received no mercy at their hands. In my surprise at being so suddenly attacked, I even forgot to raise a shout for the watch, though it is hardly likely that they would have heard me had I done so. The lazy knaves are never on the spot when they are wanted. However, we gave the ruffians a lesson that those of them who escaped are not likely to forget readily, for out of the 14 who attacked me we accounted for 10, of whom your retainer levelled no less than 6 with that staff of his, and I doubt whether any of the other 4 came off scatheless. I imagine that those levelled by your retainer got up and made off, that is, if they recovered their senses before the watch came, but I am sure that the other 4 will never steal pouch or cut throat in future. 'Tis a shame that these rascals are suffered to interfere with honest men, and it would be far better if the city authorities would turn their attention to ridding the streets of these pests instead of meddling with things that in no way concern them."
"It would no doubt be much wiser," Dame Margaret replied; "but since their betters are ever quarrelling among themselves, we can hardly wonder that the citizens do not attend to their own business." "No doubt you are right," the young count said with a smile; "but it is the highest who set the bad example, and we their vassals cannot but follow them, though I myself would far rather draw my sword against the enemies of France than against my countrymen. But methinks," and here he laughed, "the example of the wars that England has so often waged with Scotland might well cause you to take a lenient view of our misdoings." "I cannot gainsay you there, Sir Count, and truly those quarrels have caused more damage to England than your disputes between Burgundy and Orleans have so far inflicted on France. But you see I am a sufferer in the one case and not in the other. Even now I am ignorant why I have been brought here. There is a truce at present between England and France, and assuredly there are more English in the services of nobles of Burgundy than in those of Orleans, and at any rate I have seen no reason why there can at present be any doubt at all of the conduct of my lord, who has but lately defended his castle against the followers of Orleans." "So I have heard, madame, and I know that there are some of my friends who think that Duke John has behaved badly in the matter, but he seldom acts without reason, though it may not be always that one which he assigns for any action." Then changing the subject, the count went on: "I have come to take Master Guy for a walk with me, and to introduce him to some of my friends. My father is absent at present, but on his return he will, I know, hasten to express his gratitude. I trust that you can spare your esquire to go out with me?" "Why, certainly, so that he does but return in time to escort me for a walk through the streets this afternoon." "I will be sure to come back, madam," Guy said. "You have but to say the hour at which you will start, but indeed I think that I shall probably be in to dinner at 1." "I cannot see," Guy said when he had sallied out with the young count, "why they should have called upon Sir Eustace to furnish hostages. As the Duke of Burgundy has English archers in his pay, and France is at truce with England, there seems less reason than at other times to demand sureties of his loyalty, especially as he has shown that he is in no way well disposed to the Armagnacs." "Between ourselves, Guy, I think that the duke in no way expected that hostages would be given, and that he was by no means well pleased when a messenger arrived from the herald to say that he was returning with your lady and her children. What was his intention I know not, but in times like these it is necessary sometimes to reward faithful followers or to secure doubtful ones, and it may be that he would have been glad to have had the opportunity of finding so fair a castle and estate at his disposal. You know the fable of the wolf and the lamb. A poor excuse is deemed sufficient at all times in France when there is a great noble on one side and a simple knight on the other, and I reckon that the duke did not calculate upon the willingness of your Sir Eustace to permit his wife and children to come here, or upon the dame's willingness to do so, and in no way expected matters to turn out as they have done, for there is now no shadow of excuse for him to meddle with Villeroy. Indeed, I question whether the condition about hostages was of his devising, but it may well be that the king or the queen wished it inserted, and he, thinking that there was no chance of that alternative being accepted, yielded to the wish. Mind, all this is not spoken from my own knowledge, but I did hear that Duke John was much put out when he found out that the hostages were coming, and there was some laughter among us at the duke being for once outwitted." "Then you do not love him overmuch, Count?" "He is our lord, Guy, and we are bound to fight in his cause, but our vows of fealty do not include the word love. The duke his father was a noble prince, just and honourable, and he was loved as well as honoured. Duke John is a different man altogether. He is brave, as he proved in Hungary, and it may be said that he is wise, but his wisdom is not of the kind that Burgundian nobles love. It might have been wise to remove Orleans from his path, although I doubt it, but it was a dastardly murder all the same, and although we are bound to support him, it alienated not a few. Then he condescends to consort with those sorry knaves the butchers, and others of low estate, to take them into his councils, and to thrust them upon us, at which I may tell you there is grievous discontent. All this is rank treason to the duke, I have no doubt, but it is true nevertheless. Here we are at our first stopping place. This is as is kept by our Burgundian master, who has with him 2 or 3 of the best swordsmen in France, and here a number of us meet every morning to learn tricks of fence, and to keep ourselves in good exercise, which indeed one sorely needs in the city of Paris, where there is neither hawking nor hunting nor jousting nor any other kind of knightly sport, everyone being too busily in earnest to think of amusement. Several of my best friends are sure to be here, and I want to introduce you to them." When they entered the salon they found some 30 young knights and nobles gathered. 2 or 3 pairs in helmet and body armour were fighting with blunted swords, others were vaulting on to a saddle placed on a framework roughly representing a high war horse. 1 or 2 were swinging heavy maces, whirling them round their heads and bringing them down occasionally upon great sandbags 6 feet high, while others were seated on benches resting themselves after their exercises. D'Estournel's arrival was greeted with a shout, and several of those disengaged at once and came over to him. "Laggard!" one exclaimed, "what excuse have you to make for coming so late? I noted not that the Jevaux's wine had mounted into your head last night, and surely the Duke can have had need of your valuable services this morning." "Neither one nor the other befell, D'Estelle. But first let me introduce you all to my friend Guy Aylmer, an English gentleman, the son of a knight of that country, and himself an esquire of Sir Eustace de Villeroy. I am sure you will welcome him when I tell you that he saved my life last night when attacked by a band of cutthroats. Guy, these are my friends Count Pierre d'Estelle, Count Walter de Vesoul, the Sieur Jean de Perron, and the knights Louis de Lactre, Sir Reginald Poupart, Sir James Regnier, Sir Thomas d'Ordre, and Sir Philip de Noisier." "I can assure you of our friendship," the first named of these gentlemen said cordially to Guy, "for indeed you have rendered us all a service in thus saving to us our friend D'Estournel. Tell us how the matter occurred, Charles. In sooth, we shall have to take these ruffians of Paris in hand. So long as they cut each other's throats no great harm is done, but if they take to cutting ours it is time to give them a lesson." "The matter was simple enough," D'Estournel said. "As you know, it was late before we broke up at the Jevaux's last night, for I heard it strike 10:30 by the bell of Saint Germain as I sallied out. I was making my way home like a peaceful citizen, when 2 men came out from a narrow lane and stumbled roughly across me. Deeming that they were drunk, I struck one a buffet on the side of his head and stretched him in the gutter." "That was not like a peaceful citizen, Charles," one of the others broke in. "Well, hardly, perhaps, but I forgot my character at the moment. However, an instant later there was a shout, and a dozen or so armed men poured out from the lane and fell upon me. I saw at once that I had been taken in a trap. Luckily there was a deep doorway close by, so I sprang into it, and, drawing my sword, put myself in a posture of defence before they were upon me. I ran the first through the body, and that seemed to teach the others some caution. Fortunately the doorway was so deep that only 2 could assail me at once, and I held my ground for some time pretty fairly, only receiving a few scratches. Presently I saw another opening, and parrying a thrust, ran my sword through the fellow's throat. He fell with a loud outcry, which was fortunate, for it came to the ears of my friend here, and brought him and a stout retainer, a prodigiously tall fellow with a staff longer than himself, to my aid. They were but just in time, for the ruffians, furious at the fall of another of their companions, were pressing me hotly and slashing so furiously with their swords that it was as much as I could do to parry them, and had no time to thrust back in reply. My friend here ran 2 of them through, his tall companion levelled 6 to the ground with his staff, while I did what I could to aid them, and at last the 4 that remained still on their legs ran off. I believe they thought that the man with the staff was the evil one himself, who had got tired of aiding them in their villainous enterprises." "It was a narrow escape indeed, Charles," Count Walter de Vesoul said gravely, "and it was well for you that there was that doorway hard by, or your brave friend would have found but your body when he came along. It is evident, gentlemen, that when we indulge in drinking parties we must go home in couples. Of course, Charles, you must lay a complaint before the Duke, and he must let the Parisians know that if they do not keep their cutthroats within bounds, we will take to sallying out at night in parties, and will cut down every man we find about the streets." "I will lay my complaint, but I doubt if much good will come of it. The Duke will speak to the provost of the butchers, and nothing will be done." "Then we will take them in hand," the other said angrily. "If the Parisians won't keep order in their streets, we will keep it for them. Such doings are intolerable, and we will make up parties to scour the streets at night. Men passing peaceably along we shall not, of course, molest, but any parties of armed men we find about we will cut down without hesitation." "I shall be heartily glad to join one of the parties whenever you are disposed, Vesoul," D'Estournel said. Perchance I may light on one or more of the four fellows who got away last night. But now I am ready to have a bout with swords." "We have all had our turn, Charles," the other said. "Ah, then I must work with the mace," the count said. "My friend here, you see, did not come off as scatheless last night as I did, or else I would have asked him to have a bout with me. He held his own so well against two of them who fell on him together that I doubt not I should find him a sturdy adversary." "I fear not, Count," Guy said, smiling. "I can use my sword, it is true, in English fashion, but I know little of the feints and tricks with the sword such as I am told are taught in your schools." "A little practice here will amend that," D'Estournel said. "These things are well enough in a salle d'armes, and are useful when one man is opposed to another in a duel, but in a battle or a mêlée I fancy that they are but little use, though indeed I have never yet had the chance of trying. We will introduce you to the master, and I hope that you will come here regularly. It will give great pleasure to all of us. This saloon is kept by the duke for our benefit, and as you are one of his most pressingly invited guests, you are certainly free of it." They went up in a body to the master. "Maître Baudin," Count Charles said, "I have to introduce to you a gentleman who is our mutual friend, and who last night saved my life in a street brawl. He is at present an esquire of Sir Eustace de Villeroy, and has travelled hither with the knight's dame, who has come at the invitation of the duke. His father is an English knight, and as the friend of us all, we trust that you will put him upon the list of your pupils." "I shall be pleased to do so, Count Charles, the more so since he has done you such service." "I am afraid that you will find me a very backward pupil," Guy said. "I have been well taught in English fashion, but as you know, maître, we were more famed for downright hard hitting than for subtlety and skill in arms." "Downright hard hitting is not to be despised," the master said, "and in a battle it is the chief thing of all. Yet science is not to be regarded as useless, since it not only makes sword play a noble pastime, but in a single combat it enables one who is physically weak to hold his own against a far stronger antagonist." "Then I feel greatly, maître. I shall be glad indeed of lessons in the art, and as soon as my shoulder is healed I shall take great pleasure in attending your school regularly whenever my lady has no need of my presence. I am now in the position of the weak antagonist you speak of, and am therefore the more anxious to acquire the skill that will enable me to take my part in a conflict with full grown men." "You showed last night that you could do that," Count Charles said with a smile. "Nay, men of that sort do not count," Guy said. "They are but rough swordsmen, and it was only their number that rendered them dangerous. There is little credit in holding one's own against ruffians of that kind." "Well, I will be lazy this morning," the young count said, "and do without my practice. Will you all come round to my rooms, gentlemen, and drink a glass or two of wine, and make the better acquaintance of my friend? He is bound to be back at his lodgings by one, and therefore you need not be afraid that I am leading you into a carouse." Guy passed an hour in the count's lodgings, and then returned to the provost's. The count accompanied him, saying that he had not yet seen his tall friend of the night before, and must personally thank him. Long Tom was called down, he being one of the two who had remained in for the morning. "I must thank you again for the service that you rendered me last night," the count said frankly, holding out his hand to the archer. "I hope that you will accept this ring in token of my gratitude. I have had it enlarged this morning so that it may fit one of your strong fingers. It may be useful some day to turn into money should you find yourself in a pinch." "I thank you, sir," Tom said. "I will wear it round my neck, for in truth rings are not for the use of men of my condition. As to gratitude, I feel that it is rather the other way, for my arms were beginning to get stiff for want of use. I only wish that the fray had lasted a bit longer, for I had scarce time to warm to it, and I hope that the next time your lordship gets into trouble I may have the good luck to be near at hand again." "I hope you may, my friend. Assuredly I could want for no better helper." After the count had taken his leave, Guy went upstairs and told Lady Margaret how he had spent the morning. "I am very glad to hear that you said about the fencing school, Guy. It will be good for you to have such training, and indeed 'tis well that you should have some employment, for time would hang very wearily on your hands were you to remain long caged up here. I shall be very glad for you to go. It will make no difference to us whether we take our walk in the morning or in the afternoon." After dinner they went out. Guy escorted Dame Margaret, Agnes and Charlie followed, Long Tom and Jules Varoy bringing up the rear, both armed with swords and carrying in addition heavy cudgels. First of all they visited the cathedral, where Dame Margaret and her daughter knelt for some time in prayer before one of the shrines. Then, crossing the bridge again, they followed along the broad pavement between the foot of the walls and the river, which served as a market, where hucksters of all sorts plied their trade. Then, entering the next gate on the wall, they walked down the street to the Place de la Bastille, which had been finished but a few years. "Oh, it is a gloomy place, and a strong one," Dame Margaret said with a shiver as she looked at its frowning towers. "The poor wretches who were once entombed there can have but little hope of escape. Surely there cannot be so many state prisoners as to need for their keeping a building so large as that. Still, with so turbulent a population as this of Paris, it doubtless needs a strong castle to hold them." "It seems to me, madam, that though useful doubtless as a prison, the castle was never really built for that purpose, but as a stronghold to overawe Paris." "That may be so, Guy. At any rate, I am glad that they did not use it as our place of detention instead of the house of Maître Leroux." "They see well enough, madam, that you are more securely held than bolts and bars could detain you. I imagine that they would like nothing better than for you to get away back to Villeroy, since it would give them an excuse for an attack on the castle." "Yes, doubtless that is so, Guy. I came freely, and I must stay freely until some change takes place that will leave it open for us to fly. But in sooth it seems to me that nothing short of the arrival of an English army could do that. Were the Armagnacs to get the better of the Burgundians, our position would be even worse than it is now." "That is true enough, madam, for the Burgundians have no cause of hostility whatever to Sir Eustace and you, while we have given the Armagnacs good reason for ill will against us. Still, were they to come here, it would be open to you to fly, for all Artois is Burgundian, and though the duke might not be able to hold his position here, Artois and Flanders would long be able to sustain themselves, and you would therefore be safe at Villeroy, for they would have other matters to attend to without meddling with those who only ask to be let alone." On their way back from the Bastille they saw a crowd in the street and heard loud shouts. "We had best turn off by this side street, madam," Guy said. "Doubtless it is a body of the scoundrel butchers at their work of slaying some enemy under the pretext of his being an Orleanist. Do you hear their shouts of 'Paris and Burgundy'?" Turning down a side street they made a circuit round the scene of the tumult, and then, coming up into the main street again, resumed their way. After walking a considerable distance they came to a large building. "What place is this, Guy?" "It is the Louvre, madam. It should be the abode of the King of France, but he is only sometimes lodged there, but often stays at one of the hotels of the great lords. These palaces are all fortified buildings. Our country castles are strong, but there is no air of gloom about them. These narrow streets and high houses seem to crush one down." "We will go back again, Guy. I do not think that I shall often go out in future." "You can take a boat on the river, madam, and row up or down into the country. They say it is pretty once fairly away from Paris. There are hills and woods and villages." "Yes, that might be pleasant. If they would but let me go and live in one of those quiet spots, I should be as contented as it is possible for me to be away from my husband." "Nothing can be kinder than our Maître Leroy and his wife, but one cannot but feel that one is a burden upon them. My hope is that when the king comes to his senses I may be able to obtain an interview with him, and even if I cannot have leave to return to Villeroy, I may be allowed to take up my abode outside the walls, or at any rate to obtain a quiet lodging for ourselves." For the next 3 weeks the time passed quietly. Guy went every morning to the salle des armes, for his wound being on his left shoulder he was able to use his sword arm as soon as it began to heal. "You underrated your skill," the fencing master said when he had given him his first lesson. "It is true that you do not know the niceties of sword playing, but indeed you are so quick of eye and wrist that you can afford to do without them. Still, doubtless after a couple of months' practice here you will be so far improved that he will need to be a good swordsman who holds his own with you." Guy paid only one visit during this time to the lodgings of the Italian. "You have not heard from me, Master Aylmer," the latter said, "because indeed there has been nothing of importance to tell you. The Armagnacs are, I hear, collecting a great army, and are likely ere long to march in this direction. The butchers are becoming more and more unpopular and more violent. Not a day passes but many citizens are killed by them under the pretence that they are Armagnacs, but really because they had expressed themselves as hostile to the doings of these tyrants. I have cast your horoscope, and I find that the conjunction of the planets at your birth was eminently favourable. It seems to me that about this time you will pass through many perilous adventures, but you are destined to escape any dangers that threaten you. You will gain honour and renown, and come to fortune through a marriage. There are other things in your career that are uncertain, since I cannot tell at what date they are likely to occur, and whether the planets that were favourable at your birth may again be in the ascendant, but for as much as I have told you, I have no doubt whatsoever." "Why, thank you for the trouble that you have taken, Count Montepone," for Guy had now learned the rank that the Italian held in his own country, "and can only trust that your predictions will be verified. I would rather win fortune by my own hand than by marriage, though it will not come amiss." "Whatever way it may happen, you will be knighted," the astrologist said gravely, "after a great battle, and by the hand of a sovereign, though by whom the battle will be fought, and who the sovereign may be, I cannot tell, but methinks it will be the English king." "Oh, that I can wish more than anything," Guy said warmly. "Fortune is good, but to be knighted by a royal hand would be an honour greater than any other that could befall me." "Bear your destiny in mind," the Italian said earnestly. "Remember that in many cases predictions bring about their own fulfilment, and truly I am rejoiced that I have found that the stars point out so prosperous a future for you." Guy was not free from the superstition of the time, and although in his English home he had seldom heard astrology mentioned, he had found since he had been in France that many, even of the highest rank, had an implicit belief in it, and he was convinced that at any rate the count himself believed in the power of the stars. He was gratified therefore to be told that his future would be prosperous, and indeed the predictions were not so improbable as to excite doubt in themselves. He was already an esquire, and unless he fell in combat or otherwise, it was probable that he would attain the honour of knighthood before many years had passed. The fact, however, that it was to be bestowed by royal hand added greatly to the value of the honour. Knighthood was common in those days. It was bestowed almost as a matter of course upon young men of good birth, especially if they took up the profession of arms. Every noble had some, while not a few had many knights in their service, discharging what would now be the duties of officers when their levies were called out, and they could themselves bestow the rank upon any man possessing a certain amount of land. But to be knighted by a distinguished leader, or by a sovereign, was a distinction greatly prized, and placed its recipient in quite another category to the knights by service. It was a testimony alike of valour and of birth, and was a proof that its bearer was a warrior of distinction. The prophecy that he would better his fortune by marriage weighed little with him. Marriage was a matter that appeared to him at present to be a very remote contingency, and at the same time it was pleasant to him to be told that his wife would be an heiress, because this would place him above the need of earning his living by his sword, and would enable him to follow his sovereign, not as one of the train of a powerful noble, but as a free knight. Chapter 9. A stout defence. The Duke of Burgundy had left Paris upon the day after he had received Dame Margaret, and as the king had a lucid interval, the Duke of Aquitaine, his son, was also absent with the army. In Paris there existed a general sense of uneasiness and alarm. The butchers, feeling that their doings had excited a strong reaction against them, and that several of the other guilds, notably that of the carpenters, were combining against them, determined to strike terror into their opponents by attacking some of their leaders. Several of these were openly murdered in the streets, and the houses of others were burnt and sacked. One evening, when Guy had returned at 9 o'clock from a supper at Count Charles's lodgings, it being the first time he had been out after dark since his first adventure, he had but just gone up to his room when he heard a loud knocking at the door below. Going to the front window, he looked out of the casement. "Who is it that knocks?" Guy asked. "It is I, the lad of Notre Dame." He recognized the voice and ran down and opened the door. "What is it, signora?" "My father bids me tell you, sir, that he but learned the instant before he dispatched me that the butchers are going to attack this house this evening, under the pretext that there are English spies here, but really to slay the provost of the silversmiths, and to gratify their followers by the sack of his house. I fear that I am too late, for they were to march for the abattoirs at 9, and it is already nearly half past. Oh, look, I see torches coming up the street."
"It is too late indeed to fly, even if we wished to," Guy said. "Dame Margaret and the children retired to bed an hour ago. Will you take this ring," and he took off from his ring one that D'Estournel had given him, "and carry it at once to the lodgings of Count Charles d'Estournel? They are in the house on this side of the Hotel of St. Pol. He is still up and has some of his friends with him. Tell him from me that this house is being attacked, and beg him to gather a party if he can, and come to our assistance. Say that we shall defend it until the last." The girl took the ring and ran off at the top of her speed. The roar of the distant crowd could now be distinctly heard. Guy put up the strong bars of the door and then rushed upstairs. First he knocked at the door of Maître Leroux. "The butchers are coming to attack your house," he shouted. "Call up your servants, bid them take to their arms." Then he ran up to the room where his men slept. Long Tom, who had met him at D'Estournel's door and accompanied him home, sprang to his feet from his pallet as Guy entered. "The butchers are about to attack the house, Tom. Up, all of you, and arm yourselves. Bring down your bow and arrows. Where do the men servants sleep?" "There are 5 of them in the next room, and the 2 who serve in the shop are in the chamber beyond," the archer replied, as he hastily buckled on his armour. Guy rushed to the door and awoke the inmates of the room, telling them to arm and hasten down to defend the house, which was about to be attacked. A moment later Maître Leroux himself appeared and repeated the order. "Art sure of what you say, Master Guy?" he asked. "Look from the window and you will see them approaching," Guy replied, and going to the casement window which was at the front of the house, he threw it open. Some 400 yards away a dense throng was coming along. A score of torches lighted up the scene. "Resistance is vain," the silversmith said. "It is my life they seek. I will go down to them." "Resistance will not be in vain," Guy said firmly. "I have already sent for aid, and we shall have a body of Burgundian men at arms here to our assistance before long. Your life will not satisfy them. It is the plunder of your shop and house that they long for, and you may be sure that they will put all to the sword if once they break in. Now let us run down and see what we can do to strengthen our defences." "The shutters and doors are all strong," the provost said as they hurried downstairs, followed by the 4 men at arms and servants, for in those days men removed but few of their garments as they lay down in their rough pallets. "In the first place," Guy said, "we must pile everything that we can find below against these doors, so that when they yield we can still make a defence here before we retire. Are there other stairs than these?" "No." "So much the better. As soon as we have blocked the door we will barricade the first landing and defend ourselves there. Jean Bart, do you take the command below for the present. Seize everything that you can lay hands on, logs from the wood store, sacks of charcoal, cases, everything heavy that you can find, and pile them up against the door. Tom, do you come with us. An arrow or two will check their ardour. It is not likely they have brought bows or crossbows with them. Try to parley with them as long as you can, Maître Leroux. Every minute is of value." "What is all this, Guy?" Dame Margaret asked as she entered the apartment, having been aroused by the noise. She had hastily attired herself and had just come into the front room. "The butchers are about to attack the house, lady. We are going to defend it. I have sent to D'Estournel, and we may hope for aid before long." At this moment there was a loud knocking at the door and a hoarse roar of voices from the street. The silversmith went to the casement and opened it, and he and Guy looked out. A shout of fury arose from the street, with cries of "Death to the English spies! Death to the Armagnac provost!" Leroux in vain endeavoured to make his voice heard, and so tell the crowd that his guests were not spies, but had been lodged at his house by the Duke of Burgundy himself. A tall man on horseback, one of several who were evidently leaders of the mob, pressed his way through the crowd to the door and evidently gave some orders, and a din of heavy sledgehammers and axes beating against it at once mingled with the shouts of the crowd. The horseman crossed again to the other side of the street and shook his fist threateningly at Leroux. "That is Jacques Legoux," the silversmith said as he retired from the window, "one of the great leaders of the butchers. His family and the St. Yons and Desberts rule the market." "Tom," Guy said to the archer who was standing behind him, "begin by picking off that fellow on horseback opposite." Tom had already bent his bow and had an arrow in readiness. A moment later the shaft flew and struck the butcher between the eyes, and he fell dead from his horse. A yell of consternation and rage rose from the crowd. "Now you can distribute a few arrows among those fellows at the door," Guy said. The archer leant far out of the low casement. "It is awkward shooting, Master Guy," he said quietly, "but I daresay I can make a shift to manage it." Disregarding the furious yells of the crowd, he sent arrow after arrow among the men using the sledges and axes,
Many of them had steel caps with protecting rims which sheltered the neck, but as they raised their weapons with both hands over their heads they exposed their chests to the marksmen above, and not an arrow that was shot failed to bring down a man. When 6 had fallen, no fresh volunteers came forward to take their places, although another horseman made his way up to them and endeavoured by persuasions and threats to induce them to continue the work. This man was clad in armour and wore a steel cap in the place of the knightly helmet. "Who is that fellow?" Guy asked the merchant. "He is the son of Caboche, the head of the flayers, one of the most pestilential villains in the city. Keep your eye on him, Tom, and when you see a chance send an arrow home." "That armour of his is but common stuff, Master Guy. As soon as I get a chance I will send a shaft through it." The man with a gesture of anger turned and gave instructions to a number of men, who pushed their way through the crowd, first picking up some of the fallen hammers and axes. The fate of his associate had evidently taught the horseman prudence, for as he moved away he kept his head bent down so as not to expose his face to the aim of the terrible marksman at the window. He halted a short distance away and was evidently haranguing the crowd round him, and in his vehemence raised his arm. The moment he did so Tom's bow twanged. The arrow struck him at the unprotected part under the armpit, and he fell headlong from his horse. Maddened with rage, the crowd no longer hesitated, and again attacked the door. Just as they did so there was a roar of exultation down the street, as 12 men brought up a solid gate that they had beaten in and wrenched from its hinges from a house beyond. "You can shoot as you like now, Tom. I will go down and see how the men are getting on below. The mob will have the door in sooner or later." Guy found that the men below had not wasted their time. A great pile of logs, sacks, and other materials was piled against the door, and a short distance behind stood a number of barrels of wine and heavy cases ready to be placed in position. "Get them upstairs, Jean," Guy said. "They will make a better barricade than the furniture, which we may as well save if possible." The 9 men set to work, and in a very short time a strong barricade was formed across the top of the wide staircase. "Have you all the cases out of the shop?" "Yes, we have not left one there, Master Guy. If they are all full of silver there must be enough for a royal banqueting table." Some indeed of the massive chests were so heavy that it required the efforts of 6 men to carry them upstairs. "How do matters go, Guy?" Dame Margaret asked quietly as he re-entered the apartment. "Oh, very well," Guy replied. "I don't think the door will hold out much longer, but there is a strong barricade behind it, which it will take them some time to force, and another on the landing here that we ought to be able to hold for an hour at least, and before that yields we will have another ready on the landing above." "I will see to that," she said. "I will take Agnes and Charlie up with me, and then with the women I will move out the clothes and linen chests and build them up there." "Thank you, madame. I trust long before the barricade here is carried we shall have D'Estournel and his friends to our assistance. Indeed, I doubt whether they will be able to carry it at all. It is as solid and almost as strong as a stone wall, and as there are 13 or 14 of us to defend it, it seems to me that nothing short of battering the cases to pieces will enable them to force a way." "I wish I could do something," Agnes broke in. "It is hard not to be able to help while you are all fighting for us. I wish I had brought my bow with me. You know I can shoot fairly." "I think that it is just as well that you have not," Guy said with a smile. "I do not doubt your courage for a moment, but if you were placing yourself in danger we should all be anxious about you, and I would much rather know that you were safe with your mother upstairs." Guy now went to the window. Maître Leroux had been directing his servants in the formation of the barricades. "Nothing to protect the door," the archer said. "They have propped up that gate so as to cover the men who are hammering at it. I have been distributing my arrows among the crowd, and in faith there will be a good many vacancies among the butchers and flayers in the market tomorrow morning. I am just going up to fill my quiver again and bring down a spare armful of arrows." "Leave those on the landing there, Tom, and bring your full quiver down below. The door will not hold many minutes longer. I could see that it was yielding when I was down there just now. I don't think that we shall be able to make a long defence below, for their hooked halberds they will be able to pull out the logs, do what we will." One of the servants now ran in. "They have broken the door down, sir. It is only kept in place by the things behind it." Guy ran out, climbed the barricade, which on the landing was 4 feet high, but as it was built on the edge of the top stair it was 9 inches higher on that face, let himself drop onto the stairs and ran down into the passage. "I think, Maître Leroux," he said, "that you and your men had better go up at once and station yourself at the barricade. There is no room here for more than 5 of us to use our arms, and when we retire we shall have to do so quickly. Will you please fasten a chair on the top step, in such a way that we can use it to climb over the barricade without delay? We are likely to be hard pressed, and it is no easy matter to get over a 5-foot wall speedily with a crowd of armed men pressing hotly on your heels." The provost told 2 of his men to pick out a square block of firewood as nearly as possible the thickness of the height of one of the steps. After trying several, they found one that would do, and on placing it on the stair next to the top, it formed with the step above it a level platform. On this the chair was placed, a strong rope being attached to it, so that it could be pulled up over the barricade when the last of the defenders had entered. By the time this was finished, the battle below began in earnest. The infuriated assailants had pulled the doors outwards, and were making desperate efforts to climb the pile of logs. This they soon found to be impossible, and began with their halberts to pull them down, and it was not long before they dislodged a sufficient number to make a slope up which they could climb. Their work had not been carried on with impunity, for the archer had stationed himself on the top, and sent his arrows thick and fast among them. "In faith, master," he said to Guy, who stood close behind, "methinks that I am doing almost as much harm as good, for I am aiding them mightily in making their slope, which will presently contain as many dead men as logs." As soon as they deemed the slope climbable, the furious assailants charged up. They were met by Guy and the 4 men at arms. Tom had now slung his bow behind him, and had betaken himself to his heavy axe, which crashed through the iron caps of the assailants as though they had been eggshells. But in such numbers did they press on that Guy saw that this barricade could not be much longer held. "Get ready to retire when I give the word," he shouted to his companions. "Tom, you and Jules Valor and Robert Picard run first upstairs. When you climb the barricade, do you, Tom, take your place on the top. Jean Bart and I will come up last, and you can cover us with your arrows. Tell Maître Leroux to remove the light into the room, so that they will not be able to see what there is to encounter, while these torches here, and those held by the crowd, will enable you to see well enough to take aim. Now," he shouted, "fall back." Tom and the 2 men at arms sprang up the stairs. Guy and Jean Bart followed more slowly, and halted a few steps from the top. "All up, master," Tom shouted, and Jean and Guy were able to cross the barricade before the foremost of their pursuers reached them. There had indeed been confusion below, for several of those who had first climbed the barricade had, instead of pressing hotly in pursuit, run along the hall and through the door into the shop, in their eagerness to be the first to seize upon the plunder. They expected the others to follow their example, but one of their leaders placed himself in their way, and threatened to cut them down if they did not first assault the stairs. "Fools!" he shouted, "do you think that the old fox has wasted the time we have given him? You may be sure that the richest prizes have been carried above." There was an angry altercation, which was continued until those who had first run into the shop returned with the news that it had been completely stripped of its contents. There was now no longer any hesitation in obeying their leader, and the men poured up the stairs in a mass. Suddenly some torches appeared above, and those in front saw with consternation the obstacle that stood between them and their prey. They had little time for consideration, however, for the arrows from the archer now smote them, and that with a force and rapidity that bewildered them. 5 or 6 of these in front fell shot through the brain. "Heads down!" a voice shouted. There was no retreat for those in front, for the mass behind pressed them forward, and instinctively obeying the order they ran up. But neither helm nor breastplate availed to keep out the terrible English arrows, which clove their way through the iron as if it had been pasteboard. Stumbling over the bodies on those who had fallen, the front rank of the assailants at last reached the barricade, but here their progress was arrested. A line of men stood behind the smooth wall of massive cases, and those who strove to climb it were smitten with axe or sword, while they themselves could not reach the defenders above them. They could but thrust blindly with pike or halbert, for if a face was raised to direct the aim, one of the deadly arrows struck it instantly. In vain they strove by the aid of their halberts to haul down a case from its position. The weight was too great for one man's strength to move, and before several could grasp the handle of the halbert to aid them, the shaft was cut in 2 by the blow of an axe. Hopeless as the attempt seemed, it was persevered in, for the crowd below, ignorant of the nature of the obstacle, maddened with fury, and with the wine which had been freely served out before starting, still pressed forward, each fearing that the silversmith's treasure would be appropriated before he could obtain his share. For half an hour the fight continued, then there was a roar in the street, and Dame Margaret, who, after seeing the barricade above completed, had come down to her room and was gazing along the street, ran out onto the landing. "Help is at hand!" she cried. "The knights are coming!" Then came the loud tramp of horses, mingled with the shouts of "Burgundy!" The crowd at the entrance at once turned and ran out, and as the alarm reached those within, they too rushed down, until the stairs were untenanted save by the dead. Bidding the others hold their places lest the assailants should return, Guy ran in and joined Lady Margaret at the window. A fierce conflict was going on in the street, with shouts of "Burgundy! A rescue! A rescue!" The knights, who were followed by some 50 men at arms, rode into the mob, hewing them down with their swords. The humiliations that they had received from the arrogance and insolence of the butchers had long rankled in their minds, and they now took a heavy vengeance. The windows of all the houses opposite, from which men and women had been peering timidly out, were now crowded, women waving their handkerchiefs to the knights, and men loudly shouting greetings and encouragements. The whole of the traders of Paris were bitterly opposed to the domination of the market guilds, and while they cared but little for the quarrel between the rival dukes, the alliance between Burgundy and the butchers naturally drove them to sympathize with the opposite party. The proof afforded by the charge of the knights upon the mob delighted them, as showing that, allied with them though they might be, the Burgundians were determined no longer to allow the rioting and excesses of the men of the market guilds to continue. In 2 or 3 minutes all was over. The resistance, though fierce, was short, and the mob was driven down the side streets and chased until the trading quarter was cleared of them. As the knights returned, Guy went down to the door, to which Maître Leroux had already descended, to thank his rescuers for their timely aid. "I thank you, my lords and knights," the silversmith said, "for the timely succour you have rendered me. I would pray you to enter and to allow me to thank you in a more worthy fashion, but indeed the stairs and passage are encumbered with dead." "Dame Margaret of Villeroy prays me to say that she also desires greatly to thank you." "I feared that we should have been too late," Count Charles replied. "We lost no time when your messenger came, Guy, but it took some time to rouse the men at arms and to saddle our horses. You must have made a stout defence indeed, judging by the pile of dead that encumber your passage." "There are many more inside," Guy said, "and methinks that we could have held out for another hour yet if it had been needed. Indeed, the only thing that I feared was that they might set fire to the lower part of the house." "I should like to see your defences, Maître Leroux," Count Walter de Vesoul said. "What say you, my friends, shall we mount and see the scene of this battle? Methinks we might well gain something by it, for 'tis no slight thing that an unfortified house should for over an hour defend itself against a mob full of a couple of thousand strong. I doubt not, too, that Master Leroux will serve us with a flagon of wine, and moreover we should surely pay our respects to this English lady, who, while a hostage of the duke, has been thus sorely ill treated by the scum of Paris, if she will please receive us at this hour of the evening." The other knights, of whom there were 10 in number, at once dismounted. The silversmith's servants brought torches, and after ordering 2 of them to broach a cask of wine and to regale the men at arms, the provost led the way upstairs. "Wait a moment, good provost," the Count de Vesoul said. "Let us understand the thing from the beginning. I see that the knaves lying here and many of those in the road are pierced by arrows, which, as I note, have in some cases gone through iron cap or breastpiece. How comes that?" "That is the work of one of my lady's retainers. He is an English archer, and one of the most skilful. He comes from her English estate, and when she chose him as one of the 4 men at arms to accompany her, he begged leave to bring his bow and arrows, and has, in truth, as you see, made good use of them." "Ah, that is the same tall fellow who, as I told you, Walter, did me such good service in that fray," said D'Estournel. "By St. Anne, Guy, I would that I had a dozen such men among my varlets. Why, there are a round dozen lying outside the door." "There would have been more," Guy said, "had they not brought up that great gate and used it as a screen while they battered in the door here." "Then you built the barricades behind it?" Count Walter said as he climbed over the heap of logs. "Yes, Count, it was built against the door, but when they gave way they pulled it down with halberts until they could climb over it. But as you see, no small portion of slope on the outside is composed of their bodies. The archers' arrows did good execution as they worked at it, and when they made the assault, we, that is to say, Dame Margaret's 4 retainers and I, held it for some time. Then we retired up the stairs and defended that barricade we had built across the top." The knights picked their way among the bodies that encumbered the stairs. "By St. Denis, Charles, this is strong work indeed," the count said to D'Estournel as they reached the top. "No wonder the knaves found it too much for them. What are all these massive cases?" "They contain the goods from my shop," Maître Leroux said. "Master Aylmer had them carried here while the archer was defending the door, and by so doing not only made, as you see, a stout breastwork, but saved them from being plundered." "They were well fitted for it," Guy said, "for they are very weighty, and though the fellows tried hard they could not move them with their hooks, and as fast as they strove to do so the provost's men and ours struck off the heads of the halberts with axes, and the work was all the more difficult as our archer had always a shaft fitted to let fly whenever they lifted their heads." "But how did you manage to get over safely when they won the barricade below?" D'Estournel asked. "It was not an easy feat to climb this wall with a crowd of foemen behind." Guy explained how they had arranged a chair to form a step. There was, however, he went on, no great need for haste. The archer and two others went first, and he took his stand on the top of the chests in readiness to cover the retreat of the fourth man at arms and myself. But happily many of the knaves wanted to sack the shop more than to follow us, and there was such confusion below that we had time to climb over and pull up the chair before they had mustered to the attack. While they were talking, Long Tom and the others had removed one of the chests and made a passage by which they could pass through, and Maître Leroux led them into his private apartments, which were similar to, although larger than, Dame Margaret's. A number of candles had already been lighted, and in a minute Mistress Leroux entered, followed by two of her maids carrying trays with great beakers of wine and a number of silver goblets, and she and the provost then poured out the wine and offered it with further expressions of thanks to the knights. "Say naught about it, madam," Count Walter said. "It was high time that a check was put on these rough fellows who lord it over Paris and deem themselves its masters. I doubt not that they will raise some outcry and lay their complaint before the duke, but you, I trust, and other worthy citizens will be beforehand with them, and send off a messenger to him laying complaints against these fellows for attacking, plundering, and burning at their will the houses of those of better repute than themselves. We have come to your help not as officers of the duke, but as knights and gentlemen who feel it a foul wrong that such things should be done. Moreover, as Dame Margaret of Villeroy, a hostage of the duke, was lodged here at his request, it was a matter that nearly touched his honour that her life should be placed in danger by these scurvy knaves, and we shall so represent the matter to the duke." Just as the knights had drunk their wine, Guy, who had left them on the landing, entered, escorting Dame Margaret and her two children. Count Charles d'Estournel, after saluting her, presented his companions to her, and she thanked each very heartily for the succour they had brought so opportunely. "In truth, lady," the Count de Vesoul said, "methinks from what we saw that you might even have managed without us, so stoutly were you defended by your esquire and your retainers, aided as they were by those of the provost, though in the end it may be that these must have succumbed to numbers, for I can well imagine that your assailants, after the loss that they have suffered, would have spared no effort to avenge themselves, and might indeed, as a last resort, have fired the house. This they would no doubt have done long before, had it not been that by so doing they would have lost all the plunder that they counted on. This stout defence will no doubt teach these fellows some moderation, for they will see that citizens' houses are not to be plundered without hard fighting and much loss. As for ourselves, we shall see the Duke of Burgundy's lieutenant tomorrow morning, and lay the matter before him, praying him to issue a proclamation, saying that in order to suppress the shameful disorders that have taken place, he gives notice that all who attack the houses of peaceful citizens will henceforth be treated as evildoers and punished accordingly." After some further conversation the knights prepared to leave. "I shall do myself the honours, sirs," Maître Leroux said, "of sending to your lodgings tomorrow the cups that you have used, as a small testimony of my gratitude to you, and as a memorial of the events of this evening." While they were upstairs the men at arms and servants had been employed in clearing the stairs, throwing the bodies that had encumbered it out into the street. The men at arms of the knights had, after drinking the wine that had been sent out to them, aided in clearing the passage. Buckets of water had been thrown down on the stairs, and the servitors, by a vigorous use of brooms, had removed most of the traces of the fray. The work had just been finished, and Dame Margaret's men had, by Guy's orders, stationed themselves on the landing to do honour to the knights as they set out. "Ah, my tall friend," D'Estournel said to the archer, "so you have been at work again, and I can see that you are even more doughty with the bow than with that long staff of yours. Well, this time there must have been enough fighting to please even you." "It has been an indifferent good fight, my lord," Tom said; "but in truth, save for the stand on that pile of logs below, when things were for a time brisk, it has been altogether too one-sided to please me." "Most people would think that the one-sidedness was all the other way," D'Estournel laughed. Well, men, you have all done your duty to your lady right well this night, and there is not one of us here who would not gladly have such brave fellows in his service. I see that you are all four wounded. They are scarce to be called wounds, Sir Count, seeing that they are but flesh cuts from their halberts which we got in the fray below. These slaughterers can doubtless strike a good blow with a poleaxe, but they are but clumsy varlets with other weapons. But to give them their due, they fought stoutly, if with but little skill or discretion. Several of the others also said a few words of commendation to the men. The provost and Guy escorted the knights to the door below. The latter had ordered 20 of their men at arms to remain in the house until morning, after which 10 were to stay there until the doors had been repaired and refixed. As soon as the knights had ridden off, the silversmith ordered several bundles of rushes to be strewed in the shop for the guard, and a meal of cold meat to be set for their supper. 2 of them were posted as sentinels at the door. "I shall not open the shop tomorrow," he said as he ascended the stairs with Guy, "nor indeed shall I do so until things have settled down. There will be for some time a mighty animosity on the part of these butchers and skinners against me, and it is only reasonable that after such an attack I should close my shop. Those who have dealings with me will know that they can do their business with me in private. And now methinks we will retire to bed. 'Tis past midnight, and there is no fear of our being disturbed again. If they send anyone to spy out whether we are on the watch, the sight of the Burgundian soldiers below will suffice to tell them that there is nothing to be done. The first thing tomorrow I will set the carpenters to work to make me an even stronger pair of doors than those that have been spoilt."
Chapter 10. After the Fray. On going into Dame Margaret's apartments, Guy found that she had again retired to rest, and at once threw himself on his bed without disrobing himself further than taking off his armour, for he felt that it was possible that assailants might return after finding that the Burgundian knights and the men-at-arms had ridden away. He had told the men-at-arms to keep watch by turns at the top of the stairs, where the barricade still remained, and to run in to wake him should they hear any disturbance whatever at the door below. He slept but lightly, and several times went out to see that the watch was being well kept, and to look up and down the street to assure himself that all was quiet. "You did nobly last night, Guy," Dame Margaret said as she met him in the morning. "Sir Eustace himself could have done no better had he been here. When I next write to my lord I shall tell him how well you have protected us, and pray him to send word of it to your father." "I did my best, lady, but it is to Long Tom that it is chiefly due that our defence was made good. It was his shooting that caused the long delay in breaking open the door, and that enabled us to hold the barricade below, and he also stoutly aided in the defence of the landing." "Nevertheless, Guy, it was under your direction that all things were done. It is to the leader who directs that the first praise is due, rather than to the strongest and bravest of his men-at-arms. It was, too, owing to your interference on behalf of Count Charles d'Estournel that we owed it to the succour that came to us. It was his friendship for you that prompted him to gather his friends to come to our aid, and it was the warning, short though it was, sent us by that strange Italian, that enabled you to send to the Count for aid. I must see his daughter and thank her personally for the part she played in the matter. No, Guy, had it not been for you, this house would now have been an empty shell, and all of us would have been lying under its ruins. I have been thinking during the night that you must be most careful when you go abroad. You know that the son of that monster Caboche, the leader of the skinners, and doubtless many leaders of the butchers, among them Legoux, who were killed, and their friends, are certain to endeavour to take vengeance on you. They saw you at the window. They will know that you are my esquire, and will doubtless put down their defeat entirely to you. You cannot be too careful, and above all, you must not venture out at night save on grave occasion. Oh, Agnes," she broke off as the girl entered the room, "you too must thank our brave esquire for having so stoutly defended us." "I do thank you most heartily, Guy," the girl said, "though I felt it very hard that I could do nothing to help you. It was terrible sitting here and hearing the fighting so close to us, and the dreadful shouts and screams of those people, and to have nothing to do but to wait. Not that I was frightened, I felt quite confident that you would beat them, but it was so hard to sit quiet. I should not have minded so much if I could have been standing there to see the brave deeds that were being done." "Like the queen of a tournament, Agnes," her mother said with a smile. "Yes, indeed, it's one of the hardships of us women. It's only when a castle is besieged and her lord is away that a woman may buckle on armour and set an example to her retainers, by showing herself on the wall and risking the enemy's bolts, or even, if necessary, taking her place with her retainers on the breach. At other times she must be passive and wait while men fight." "If I had only had my bow," Agnes said regretfully, "I could really have done something. You would have let me go out then, mother, would you not?" "Oh, I don't know, dear. No, I don't think I should. It was anxious work enough for me as it was. If you had gone out I must have done so, and then Charlie would have wanted to go too. No, no, it was much better that we all sat together as we did, waiting quietly for what might come, and praying for those who were fighting for us." "I was glad that Madame Leroux stayed upstairs with her maid instead of coming down here as you asked her, mother. She looked so scared and white that I do think it would have been worse than listening to the fighting to have had to sit and look at her." Dame Margaret smiled. "Yes, Agnes, but I think that she was more frightened for her husband than for herself, and I don't suppose that she had ever been in danger before. Indeed, I must say that to look out at that crowd of horrible creatures below, brandishing their weapons, shouting and yelling, was enough to terrify any quiet and peaceable woman. As a knight's wife and daughter it was our duty to be calm and composed, and to set an example, but a citizen's wife would not feel the same obligation, and might show her alarm without feeling that she disgraced herself or her husband." On going out, Guy found their host already engaged in a conference with a master carpenter as to the construction of the new doors. They were to be very strong and heavy, made of the best oak, and protected by thick sheets of iron. The hinges were to be of great strength to bear the weight. A smith had also arrived to receive instructions for making and setting very strong iron bars before the shop, the front of which would require to be altered to allow of massive shutters being erected on the inside. Iron gates were also to be fixed before the door. "That will make something like a fortress of it, Master Aylmer," the silversmith said, "and it will then need heavy battering rams to break into it. Several others of my craft similarly protect their shops, and certainly no one can blame me, after the attack of last night, for taking every means to defend myself. I intend to enlist a party of 10 fighting men to act as a garrison until these troubles are all over." "I think that you will be acting wisely in doing so," Guy said. "Your servants all bore themselves bravely last night, but they had no defensive armour, and were unaccustomed to the use of weapons. Only I would advise you to be very careful as to the men that you engage, or you may find your guard within as dangerous as the mob without." "I will take every pains as to that, you may be sure, and will engage none save after a careful inquiry into their characters." The streets had already been cleared of the slain. All through the night little parties had searched for and carried off their dead, and when at early morning the authorities sent a party down to clear the street, there remained but some 25 bodies, evidently by their attire belonging to the lowest class, and presumably without friends. That day petitions and complaints were sent to the king by the provosts of the merchants, the gold and silversmiths, the cloth merchants, the carpenters, and others, complaining of the tumults caused by the butchers and their allies, and especially of the attack without cause or reason upon the house of Maître Leroux, the worshipful provost of the silversmiths. Several skirmishes occurred in the evening between the two parties, but an order was issued in the name of the king to the mayor and syndics of Paris, rebuking them for allowing such disturbances and tumults, and ordering them to keep a portion of the burgher guard always under arms, and to repress such disturbances and severely punish those taking part in them. Maître Leroux and his wife paid a formal visit to Dame Margaret early in the day to thank her for the assistance that her retainers had given in defending the house. "You were good enough to say, madam," the silversmith said, "that you regretted the trouble that your stay here gave us. We assured you then and truly that the trouble was as nothing, and that we felt your presence as an honour. Now you see it has turned out more. Little did we think when you came here but a few days since that your coming would be the means of preserving our lives and property. Yet so it has been, for assuredly if it had not been for your esquire and brave retainers we should have been murdered last night. As it is, we have not only saved our lives but our property, and save for the renewal of the doors we shall not have been the losers even in the value of a crown piece. Thus, from being our guests you have become our benefactors, and one good result of what has passed is that henceforth you will feel that however long your stay here, and however much we may try to do for you, it will be but a trifle toward the discharge of the heavy obligation under which we feel to you." After a meeting of the city council that afternoon, A guard of 10 men was sent to the silversmiths to relieve the Burgundian men at arms. 5 of these were to be on duty night and day until the house was made secure by the new doors and iron grill erected in front of the shop. Guy proposed to Dame Margaret that he should give up his visit to the salle des armes, but this she would not hear of. "I myself and the children will go no more abroad until matters become more settled, but it is on all accounts well that you should go to the school of arms. Already the friends that you have made have been the means of saving our lives, and it is well to keep them. We know not what is before us, but assuredly we need friends. Maître Leroux was telling me this morning that the Armagnacs are fast approaching, and that in a few days they will be within a short distance of Paris. Their approach will assuredly embitter the hostility between the factions here, and should they threaten the town there may be fierce fighting within the walls as well as without. At present, at any rate, there are likely to be no more disturbances such as that of last night, and therefore no occasion for you to remain indoors. Even these butchers, arrogant as they are, will not venture to excite the indignation that would be caused by another attack on this house. That, however, will make it all the more likely that they will seek revenge in other ways, and that the house will be watched at night, and any that go out followed and murdered. You and Tom the archer are no doubt safe enough from the attack of ordinary street ruffians, but no 2 men, however strong and valiant, can hope to defend themselves successfully against a score of cutthroats. But I pray you, on your way to the school, go round and thank, in my name, this Italian and his daughter, and say that I desire much to thank the young lady personally for the immense service that she had rendered me and my children. Take the archer with you, for even in the daytime there are street brawls in which a single man who had rendered himself obnoxious could readily be dispatched." "In faith, Master Guy," Long Tom said as they sallied out, "it seems to me that if our stay in Paris is a prolonged one I shall return home rich enough to buy me an estate, for never did money so flow into my pocket. We have been here but a short time, and I have gained as much and more than I should do in a year of hard service. First there was that young French count. The very next morning when he called here he gave me a purse with 30 crowns, telling me presently that it was at the rate of 5 crowns for each skull I cracked on his behalf. Then this morning Maître Leroux came to me and said, 'Good fellow, it is greatly to your skill and valour that I owe my life and that of my wife. This will help you to set up housekeeping when you return home.' And he gave me a purse with 100 crowns in it. What think of you that, master? The other 3 also got purses of 50 crowns each. If that's the rate of pay in Paris for a couple of hours' fighting, I don't care how often I take a share in a fray." "You are doing well indeed, Tom, but you must remember that sooner or later you might go into a fray and lose your life, and with it the chance of buying that estate you speak of." "We must all take our chances, master, and there's no winning a battle without the risk of the breaking of casques. Are we going to the house we went to the first night we came here, Master Guy? Methinks that this is the street we stopped at." "Yes, Tom, it was the man who lives here who sent me word that the butchers were going to attack the provost's house by the same messenger who met us before Notre Dame, and who last night, after warning me, carried my message to Count Charles, praying him to come to our aid." "Then he did us yeoman service," the archer said warmly, "though I think not that they would have carried the barricade had they fought till morning." "Perhaps not, though I would not say so for certain, for they might have devised some plan such as they did for covering themselves while they assaulted the door; but even had they not done so, they would have been sure before they retired to have fired the house." "That's what I thought of when they were attacking us," the archer said, "and wonderful why they should waste men so freely when a torch would have done their business just as well for them." "That would have been so, Tom, had they only wished to kill us, but though no doubt the leaders desired chiefly the life of the provost, the mob simply fought for plunder. If they had found all the jeweller's store in his shop they would have fired the house very quickly when they discovered that they could not get at us, but it was the plunder that they wanted, and it was the sight of those chests full of silverware that made them venture their lives so freely in order to have the handling of it. I do not think that I shall be long here, Tom. Do not wait for me at the door, but stroll up and down, keeping a short distance away so that I can see you when I come out." A decrepit old woman opened the door, and on Guy giving his name she said that she had orders to admit him if called. The girl came out dressed in her female attire as he went upstairs. "Ah, signor," she said, "I am glad indeed to see that you are safe." "Thanks to you," he said warmly, "we are all your debtors indeed." "I had but to run a mile or two," she said, "but what was there in that? But indeed I had an anxious time. I so feared that I should be too late.
When I had seen the Count d'Estournel and delivered your message to him, and had shown him your ring, and he and his friends had declared that they would call up their men and come at once to your aid, I could not go back and wait until this morning to learn if they arrived in time, so I ran to your street again and hid in the doorway and looked out. Just as I got there they broke in the door, and I saw some of them rush in, but there was a pause, though they were all pressing to enter. They went in very slowly, and I knew that you must be defending the entrance. At last there was a sudden rush, and I almost cried out. I thought that it was all over. A great many entered, and then there was a pause again. The crowd outside became more and more furious. It was dreadful to hear their shouts and to see the waves of torches and weapons. They seemed to be almost mad to get in. The crush round the door was terrible, and it was only when 2 or 3 horsemen rode in among them shouting that the press ceased a little. One horseman obtained silence for a moment by holding up his hand. He told them that their friends inside were attacking a barricade and would soon carry it, and then there would be silver enough for all, but that by pressing forward they did but hamper the efforts of their comrades. It seemed, such a long time before I saw the Burgundians coming along, and I could not help throwing my cap up and shouting when they charged into the crowd. I waited until it was all over, but then I ran back home, and had a rare scolding for being out so late, but I did not mind that much, after knowing that you were all safe." At this moment a voice from the landing above said, "Are you going to keep Master Aylmer there all day with your chattering, Katarina?" The girl made a little face and nodded to Guy to go upstairs. "Katarina is becoming a madcap," the astrologer said as he led Guy into the room. "I cannot blame her altogether. I have made a boy of her, and I ought not to be shocked at her acting like one, but she gave me a rare fright last night when she did not return until close on midnight. Still, it was natural for her to wish to see how her mission had turned out." "Her quickness saved all our lives," Guy said. "Had it not been for her carrying my message to the Count d'Estournel, we should have been burnt alive before morning." "It was unfortunate that I sent you the message so late, Master Aylmer. I was busy when a medical student who sometimes gathers news for me in the butcher's quarter came here, and left a missive for me. Had he sent up a message to me that it was urgent, I would have begged the personage I had with me to wait a moment while I read the letter. As it was, it lay downstairs till my visitor departed. When I learned the news I sent off Katarina at once. She had but a short time before come in, and was fortunately still in her boy's dress, so there was no time lost. I went out myself at 10 o'clock to see what was going on, and must have been close to her without either of us knowing it. I looked on for a short time, but seeing that nothing could be done, and feeling sure that the house must be taken, knowing nothing of the chance of the Burgundians coming to the rescue, I returned here and was surprised to find that Katarina had not returned. I did not think that she could have reached the shop and warned you before the mob arrived, and therefore I became greatly alarmed as the time went by without her appearing. Indeed, my only hope was that she must have been looking on at the fight and would return when it was all over, as indeed it turned out, and I should have rated her much more soundly than I did had she not told me how she had fetched the Burgundians, and that they had arrived in time. I hear that there is a great stir this morning. The number of men they have lost, and especially the deaths of Legoux and of the young Caboche, have infuriated the butchers and the skinners. They have already sent off 2 of their number to lay their complaint before the Duke of Burgundy of the conduct of some of his knights in attacking them when they were assailing the house of a noted Armagnac, but they feel that they themselves for the moment must remain quiet, as the royal order has emboldened the mairie, supported by the Traders' Guild, and notably by the carpenters, who are a very strong body, to call out a portion of the city guard, and to issue an order that all making disturbances, whomsoever they may be, and under whatsoever pretext they are acting, will be summarily hung if captured when so engaged. In spite of this there will no doubt be troubles, but they will not venture again to attack the house of the silversmith, at any rate until an order comes from the Duke of Burgundy to forbid his knights from interfering in any way with their doings." "Which I trust he will not send," Guy said, "and I doubt if the knights will obey it if it comes. They are already much enraged at the insolence of the butchers, and the royal proclamation this morning will justify them in aiding to put down disturbances whatsoever may be the duke's orders. And now, Sir Count, I have come hither this morning on behalf of my lady mistress to thank you for sending the news, and still more for the service your daughter rendered in summoning the knights to her assistance. My lady desires much to return thanks herself to your daughter, and will either call here to see her or would gladly receive her at her lodging should you prefer that." "I should prefer it, Master Aylmer. Your lady can scarcely pass through the streets unnoticed, for her English appearance marks her at once, and as all know she lodges at the silversmith's, she will be more particularly noticed after the events of last night, and her coming here will attract more attention to me than I care for. Therefore I will myself bring Katarina round, and will do myself the honour of calling upon your lady. I can wrap the girl up in a cloak so that she shall not attract any observation, for no one knows save the old woman below that I have a daughter here, and with so many calling at the house, and among them some reckless young court gallants, I care not that it should be known, if for no other reason than were it so, it would soon be suspected that the lad who goes so often in and out is the girl in disguise, and I could then no longer trust her in the streets alone. You will find my lady in at whatever hour you come, signor, for she has resolved not to go abroad again until order is restored in Paris." "The decision is a wise one," the Italian said, "though indeed I think not that she would be in any danger, save that which every good looking woman runs in troubled times like these, when crime is unpunished, and those in authority are far too occupied with their own affairs to trouble their heads about a woman being carried off. But it is different with you and your comrade. The butchers know well enough that it was your work that caused their failure last night. Your appearance at the window was noticed, and it was that tall archer of yours who played such havoc among them. Therefore I advise you to be ever on your guard, and to purchase a mail shirt and wear it under your doublet, for however watchful you may be, an assassin may steal up behind you and stab you in the back. You may be sure that Caboche and the friends of Lagout will spare no pains to take vengeance upon you." Guy presently rejoined the archer in the street. "Henceforth, Tom," he said, "you must always put on breast and back piece when you go out. I have been warned that our lives will almost surely be attempted, and that I had best put on a mail shirt under my doublet." "Perhaps it would be best, Master Guy. I fear not three men if they stand up face to face with me, but to be stabbed in the back is a thing that neither strength nor skill can save one from. But as I care not to be always going about in armour, I will expend some of my crowns in buying a shirt of mail also. 'Tis better by far than armour, for a man coming up behind could stab one over the line of the back piece or under the arm, while if you have mail under your coat they will strike at you fair between the shoulders, and it's only by striking high up on the neck that they have any chance with you. A good coat of mail is money well laid out, and will last a lifetime, and even if it cost me all the silversmith's crowns, I'll have a right good one." Guy nodded. He was wondering in his own mind how he should be able to procure one. His father had given him a purse on starting, but the money might be needed for emergencies. He certainly could not ask his mistress for such a sum, for she too might have need of the money that she had brought with her. He was still turning it over in his mind when they reached the fencing school. He was greeted with acclamations as he entered by the young count and his friends. "Here is our defender of houses!" the former exclaimed. "Truly, Guy, you have given a lesson to the butchers that they sorely needed. They say that the king himself, who is in one of his good moods today, has interested himself mightily in the fray last night, and that he has expressed a wish to hear of it from the esquire who he had been told commanded the defence, so it is not unlikely that there will be a royal message for you to attend at the palace. Fortunately we had the first say in the matter this morning. My father returned last night, and he is rather a favourite of his majesty. We got him to go to the king and obtain audience as soon as he arose, to complain of the conduct of the butchers in attacking the house of the provost of the silversmiths, and where, moreover, Dame Villeroy, who had arrived here in obedience to his majesty's own commands, was lodged. The king, when he heard it, was mightily offended. He said he had not been told of her coming, and that this insult to her touched his honour. He sent at once for the mayor and the syndics, and upbraided them bitterly for allowing such tumults to take place, and commanded them to put a stop to them under pain of his severe displeasure. That accounts, you see, for the mayor's proclamation this morning. The king desired my father to thank me and the other knights and gentlemen for having put down the riot, and said that he would at once send off a message to the Duke of Burgundy, commanding him to pay no attention to any reports the butchers might send to him, but to give them a stern answer that the king was greatly displeased with their conduct, and that if any fresh complaint about them was made he would straightway have all their leaders hung. It's one thing to threaten and another to do, Guy, but at any rate, so long as the duke is away, they will see that they had best keep quiet, for when the king is in his right senses and is not swayed by others, he is not to be trifled with. You can imagine what an excitement there was last night when that boy you sent arrived. The ring was sent up first, and when I gave orders that he should be admitted he came in well nigh breathless. There were 6 or 8 of us, and all were on the point of leaving. Thinking that it might be something private, they had taken up their hats and cloaks. The boy, as he came in, said, 'Which of you is Count Charles d'Estournel?' 'I am,' I said. 'You are the bearer of a message from Guy Aylmer?' 'I am, my lord. He prays you hasten to his assistance, for the butchers and skinners are attacking Maître Leroux's house, and had begun to hammer on the door when I was still in the street. If they make their way in, they will surely kill all they find in there. They are shouting, "Death to the Armagnacs! Death to the English spies!"' So I called upon my comrades to join me, and all were eager to do so. We had long been smarting under the conduct of these ruffians, and moreover I was glad to discharge a part of my debt to you. So each ran to his lodgings and dispatched servitors to summon their men at arms, and to order the horses to be saddled, and to gather in front of my lodging with all speed. 2 or 3 of my friends who had left earlier were also summoned, but though we used all the speed we could, it was more than an hour before all were assembled. The men at arms were scattered and had to be roused. Then there was the work of getting the stables open, and we had to force the doors in some places to do it. I was on thorns, as you well imagine, and had little hope when we started that we should find any of you alive. Delighted indeed we were when, on getting near enough, we could see the crowd was stationary, and guessed at once that you were still holding out, though how you could have kept so large a number at bay was beyond us. We struck heartily and heavily, you may be sure, and chased the wolves back to their dens with a will. I hear that what with those you slew in the house and street, and those we cut down, it's reckoned that a couple of hundred were killed, though as to this none can speak with certainty, seeing that so many bodies were carried away before morning." "I trust that none of you received wounds, Count Charles?" "Oh, none of us, though several of the men at arms had gashes from the rascals' weapons, but naught I think that will matter." At this moment one of the attendants of the salon came in. "An usher from the palace is here, my lords and gentlemen. He has been to the lodging of Master Guy Aylmer, and has learned that he will most likely be here. If so, he has the king's command to conduct him to the palace, as his majesty desires to have speech with him." "I told you so, Guy. My father's story has excited the king's curiosity, and he would fain hear all about it. Make the most of it, for his majesty loves to be entertained and amused." "Had I better ask the usher to allow me to go back to my lodging and put on a gayer suit than this?" Guy asked. "Oh, certainly not. The king loves not to be kept waiting. Fortunately no time has been wasted so far, as this is on the road from the silversmiths to the palace." The Louvre at that time bore no resemblance to the present building. It was a fortress surrounded by a strong embattled wall, having a lofty tower at each corner, and others flanking its gates. On the water face the towers rose from the edge of the river, so that there was no passage along the quays. The building itself was in the castellated form, though with larger windows than were common in such edifices. 8 turret-shaped buildings rose far above it, each surmounted with very high steeple-like roofs, while in the centre rose another large and almost perpendicular roof, terminating in a square open gallery. The building was further protected by 4 embattled towers on each side, so that if the outer wall were carried it could still defend itself. In the courtyard between the outer wall and the palace were rows of low barracks, where troops were lodged. 2 regiments of the best soldiers of Burgundy were quartered here, as the duke feared that some sudden rising of the Armagnac party might put them in possession of the king's person, in which case the Orleanists would easily persuade him to issue proclamations as hostile to Burgundy as those which were now published in his name against the Orleanists. The Louvre, indeed, differed but slightly from palaces of several of the great nobles within the walls of Paris, as all of these were to some extent fortified, and stood as separate fortresses, capable of offering a stout resistance to any attack by the populace. "I would rather face those villains of last night for another hour than go before the king," Guy said, as he prepared to follow the attendant, "but I trust that good may come of my interview, and that I can interest the king in the case of my mistress." Joining the usher, who was waiting at the entrance, and who saluted him courteously, for the manner in which the message had been communicated to the usher showed him that the young squire was in no disgrace with the king, Guy walked with him to the Louvre, which was a short half-mile distant. Accompanied as he was by a royal officer, the guard at the gate offered no interruption to his passage, and proceeding across the courtyard he entered the great doorway to the palace, and, preceded by the usher, ascended the grand staircase and followed him along a corridor to the apartments occupied by the king.